Right. So TST meeting, what are we? December 19th, I think. Um, we have just a couple of questions on the table, and then if there's anything else, of course, we can talk about it. Um, I think I understand them, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think the first one is when we say we're supporting two releases, and therefore we want to run QA on builds for a couple of releases. Does that mean when we release 4.1, does it mean 4.1, 4.0, and 3.0, or just the latest version of 4 and the latest version of 3? Um, is there a problem? I know that question came up on Slack. I didn't realize it was really an issue. I thought we had resources that we could go ahead and support all 3 versions.
Yeah, so I brought that question, Larry. So I had a general question, like let's say if we are back supporting 2 versions, so would it also include the dot releases or is the major releases like 3.0 and 4.0? Because right now on each pod, what we are doing is we are starting from 3.0, 4.0, 4.1, and then master. So it's like a long list. And we thought that we can eliminate 3.0 and then let's just focus on 4.0, 4.1, and the master build.
Well, yeah, I don't know that we have a lot of demand for 3.0. We sort of claimed that we would support it, so I would be inclined to do 4. The latest minor release of each major release. So that would be 4.1, if I said that right, 4.1 and 3.0. Or, but I don't feel strongly about that. It would be fine to eliminate one of those runs.
So
Luca,
you're saying that
do you see demand for 3.0 at all? I haven't. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can see.
Yeah, I know you're there.
No, no, not really. I mean, most of the people working on automated deployments, at least working with us, are on 4 nowadays.
And I think if they are working on an older version and it doesn't work, more often than not, you see messages on Slack, hey, try the latest.
So to clarify here, the issue is more with the nightly builds rather than support, right?
As yeah, it's really just the builds that take time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the builds, Luca.
Does anyone ever backport anything to 3.0 at this time?
I mean, over time, we have gone back to the previous release and done some fixes, but it's a rare event, and I don't think it's one that we necessarily need to be over diligent about. I think Luca's right. When people have problems in 3, we say, well, that you ought to update to 4.
Well, but I'm also saying we've never really pushed back on helping people on 3, right? We strongly encourage people to move to 4, but if China Unicom, I don't know, comes to me and say, hey, I can upgrade to 4, I really need help on 3, I don't say, well, I won't help you, right? Here, the real issue is, well, not me, I mean, all of us. The real issue here is if we should still build it or not.
Right, so that is completely separable as to whether we support it. So I don't see a compelling reason to continue to build 3.0.
Or one solution could be like we have several pods right now and then use 3.0 on one of the pods, and then the other pods that we are actively testing, maybe we don't build 3.0 on those pods.
That would be fine. That would be a reasonable compromise.
So at least we know that 3.0 is like building and then it still works fine.
Right, and there's absolutely no reason that shouldn't always be the case. But I mean, even in, hypothetically build 3.0 once a week just to make sure the bits haven't rotted.
Okay, that sounds good then.
Okay, is
I
that
think
okay
from
with
QA
everyone?
point of view, yeah, from QA point of view, I'm like it's good.
So hold on. Another proposal was to abandon 4.0. Well, abandon 4.0 and keep 4.1.
Yep. I mean, in theory, anyone that was running on 4.0 should be able to bring in 4.1 and use it. I don't know that in practice that will be quite as smooth as it ought to be.
So here is the thing. Initially, we all say 4.1 is just 4.0 plus E-Cord and M-Cord. Then practically, I know some new stuff came in 4.1 as well, at the point that they might be considered probably two different major releases, right? So if this is true, your assumption, well, the assumption is not so obvious that someone moves necessarily from 4.0 to 4.1 right away if he was feeling comfortable with 4.0.
There are lots of people on 4.0, right?
Yeah, so what I mean is that either we decide that, so the first thing is 4.1 a major release or not, right? And then I think we should stick with the rule that we support the last two releases. So if 4.1 is a major release, we should support 4.1 and 4.0.
Well, I'm fine supporting 4.1 and 4.0. That I think that's fine. I think even if you did the two releases, you wouldn't necessarily exclude 4.0 as a consequence. It's just that it ought to have been the case that 4.1 was purely additional profiles, but nothing else changed, and we all know that isn't quite right because there effectively, you could argue there were some bug fixes in there, although I don't think it got described that way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's continue supporting both 4.0 and 4.1, and technically we're still supporting 3.0, but we're testing it only rarely. And by the way, by supporting, it's always at our discretion as to whether we invest time in going back and fixing bugs or saying, sorry, that we just can't put the resources into that. That's always an option.
Okay.
Okay. On the other question, the second question, my understanding it was essentially what is the release? What is the version number on master? And I think there was a proposal that it's definitely not the previous release because we're pushing the code forward. So let's call it 5.0-devel or -snapshot. I don't have a strong feeling about that, but if someone else does.
Is this the branch name we are talking about?
No, the version number.
Yeah, the branch is still master. It's just it's a version number question.
Version number.
So basically, the conversation kind of went on Slack is, hey, can we follow the same kind of versioning technique that typically Java applications use with Maven, right? Which is the master is the next version -snapshot, the next major version really -snapshot or whatever version, and then when you cut a release, you create a support branch. So it'd be 4.0 support branch, and then on that 4.0 support branch, you would have tags for 4.0.1, 4.0.2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that was kind of where I think that's kind of what you were describing, Jono. Was that fair?
Yeah.
But every time we tag the master and then the master moves forward for the next build, what are we going to tag?
You don't tag the master. You tag our support release support branch.
Yeah, you tag release commits, and then whenever you're not on a release commit, the version number that is in the software basically tells you that you're not on a release. It says it's working towards the next release, basically.
Yeah.
so that because right now what we do is we run the version after a release, and so right now the version in Cord is 5.0, whatever, right?
No, it's now still 4.1
Okay,
since
yeah.
we ended up having the discussion.
Yeah.
So by convention, it would be currently master versioning would be 5.0 snapshot.
Yeah, or 5.0 dash devel, or whatever the suffixes that you use to indicate that you're in development.
Yeah, the other discussion that came out of this is that not every component has a version declared within itself. So like this discussion came out from the version in the GUI, but we don't have a version number, an explicit version number like in the core, in the synchronizers, in Tosca, in Chameleon.
Yeah, components should be able to self-report their version.
Right. So self-reporting is good. The question as to what for example, the core version number is went off into a much more involved discussion in having to do with how you version data models. And that's the discussion I didn't want to try to settle here, but that we have some proposal come forward. I had a long conversation with Soppen, who I don't think is on, about some options there. But as Mateo said, it's self-reporting, so this is maybe a question for the core more than anything else. Why in that case? Let's settle the easy question first. Is dash devel okay? Mixed release dash devel?
Yeah, that sounds appropriate. Snapshot has a sense of finality for me.
Yeah, I agree. I like devel for that.
Yeah, Snapshot is like very Java-y to me, but yeah. I don't think it really matters too much. I think devel works.
Yeah, okay. So that's settled. Do we want to have an extended discussion about the versioning, or pushing this into a design document is my proposal, although I'm happy for volunteers on who wants to put time onto that. I mean, maybe the point is we just need a first draft of someone that really cares deeply about it, and then we can all start commenting on it.
I don't think we should discuss API versioning without SAP, and since I know we had some strong feelings about it. So it seems like if we want to dive into API versioning, maybe going the design document route and tossing around some ideas and kind of have a working, living document for a while, then bringing that up for proposal is maybe the route to go. And
in fact, since Soppen made the mistake of not being on, I would nominate him to do the first draft of it.
Approved.
Okay, good.
Is API versioning the same as component versioning? So, for example, like XOS should have a version, and potentially the different services that get loaded should have a version as well, right? Is that the same as the API version, or is there a difference there?
Yeah, I think the complication.
I mean, it could be interesting because you're going to say, "Oh, I'm running the application version, 2.0, but I'm using API 3.5." That might be confusing.
Yeah, I was going to say the complication comes from backward support. How we're going to support backward versions of the API. Certainly it seems like we could always offer a current version that's the same as the component version, but then what do you do about all of the backward compatible ones if you have legacy clients? And as soon as we start moving off in the direction where different components have version life cycles that are different from each other, and we're no longer a monolithic distribution, I think it all gets more complicated, and that's the part that I think we want to toss around in the design document.
When do we think we're going to hit a point where the API isn't changing that often, but we'll still be revving versions, right? Because if we're not changing with every release the API, then that makes a lot more sense, right? We're still in version 2 of the API, but if we're iterating that API quite frequently, then I think it gets a little more difficult.
Well, and there's multiple versions of the API too. If we say the API is auto-generated from the services, and then you march forward with the VTN service, but the VSG service doesn't change, then you've got, one API is newer than the other API. I think it opens up a lot of questions, I think. What granularity do we want to break this down at?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So I would just like to see something concrete proposed that we can pound on and agree to. And if you feel strongly, there will be an opportunity to comment on that. And even if you don't feel strongly. Are there other topics? Not hearing any. I think we just as well go ahead and adjourn. I don't hear enthusiasm for that either, but let's go ahead. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.